This is the Second Studio, hosted by the Architecture and Design Office fame. My name is David Lee, and with me is Marina Borderonay. The two of us are architects, partners at the office, and hosts of the show. And today our guest is Charles Durrett.
Charles is an architect and also the founder of the Cohousing company. They've designed over 50 co-housing communities around the world, and he wrote, I think he said, over 16 books.
Yes.
So he's been a busy man.
A busy man, yeah. So with Charles, we talk about co-housing. Of course, we hear his initial backstory and how he got into architecture. He went to my alma mater, Cal Poly, and how he, when he realized that co-housing and the more socially focused aspect of architecture was going to be his direction. And so we dive into some of the details of what it means to create a co-housing neighborhood, the challenges of it, what makes it successful, what makes it not, and some anecdotes about things that he's worked on. And the time went by like ultra fast. So, because there's a lot to cover, obviously. So I hope you guys enjoy it. And if you have any questions about this, let us know. And I think this is then a conversation will probably continue in the broader sense moving forward. Sponsors.
This episode of The Second Studio is brought to you by BQE Core, the all-in-one firm management software built for architects. Designed by architects for architects, Core helps you track time effortlessly, manage projects seamlessly, and get paid faster so you can focus on design, not spreadsheets. With powerful automation and real-time insights, it's everything you need to run a smarter, more profitable firm. See how BQE Core can transform your practice by clicking the link in our show notes. The Second Studio podcast is sponsored by Autodesk. And do you know about Autodesk Forma? Available standalone or as part of the AEC Collection software bundle, it's a specialized AI-assisted 3D design tool that can transform early project planning. With Forma, you can rapidly model multiple massing options at the start of projects and analyze the embodied carbon cost of different volumes, layouts, and material choices. You can then deepen your understanding of your sites by incorporating real-world contextual data for daylight, wind, noise, and more. So start your projects right with Autodesk Forma. Check out the link in our show notes to learn more.
This is The Second Studio with myself, Marina, and our guest, Charles. Here we go.
My youth was did not do much to influence me towards architecture, other than I'm from the little county of Sierra County with only 3,000 people, and I wanted to move back to there, which I lived the next door county, but and I thought being an architect, there's no architects in the whole county. I never met an architect before I had applied to architecture school and got in. And turns out that I started, however, I had a bigger issue, which is I was listening to a radio show one day, and they were talking about how the 100 most fertile square miles in the world were under asphalt, and otherwise known as Stockton, California. 10 by 10 miles of California was covered by asphalt and buildings and, just development. And as a result, they could not fertilize the soil that should have been farmland, the whole Stockton area. And they shipped water down to Southern California to farm Southern California below Fresno. So anyway, I decided to go to school as a planner. And then I changed because I realized that planners mostly just process applications, and I didn't want to do that. And they don't do much planning. Politicians do the planning. And so I went to structural engineer, thinking I could then move back to Sierra County. I did that for a couple years, and I was a good student, but then one day I realized that structural engineers don't get to pick colors, and I'm really into picking colors. If you look at my webpage, you'll see that there's very colorful buildings. And so I switched over to architecture at Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo. So I went there for 4 years to graduate from a 5-year program, and I went to University of Copenhagen for 1 year, and I went to the Academy of Art in downtown Copenhagen for 1 year as well. So that's the youth. Not very interesting. I mean, although I worked my way through college doing logging and mining. I was 500 feet below the earth logging and hot and sweaty up above
What?
logging. I mean, on the mining below the surface of the earth. Worked my way through college doing that. And then because that's what they do in Sierra County. That's how they make a living, is mining and logging, and then logged in the summers. Anyway, off to Cal Poly. And, the whole education experience was great. I appreciated it immensely. And at the University of Copenhagen, I was about ready to leave one day. Well, I had an airline ticket. I was on my way to the airport. And we stopped by, my Danish host father took me by this brand new housing project that was about 75% complete. And I saw what amounted to a modern day village, where the houses were only 20 feet from front door to front door. The kitchen windows looked out of the house towards the front lane. There was a big building which had like lots of things like common laundry, etc. And it really looked like it made sense to me. Even in Denmark, I walked to the train station every day, and I never saw life between the buildings in the single-family house neighborhoods. I never saw life between the buildings at the apartments or the condos or even the assisted care. Then there was another co-housing project on my way to this train station every day, and I saw life there just about every day. So anyway, after seeing this brand new co-housing, which turns out to be one of the best ones in Denmark, if not the best one, I decided, okay, this is what I'm going to do for a living. And I went back, finished college. And then I went back to Denmark a couple of years later and wrote a book about it called Co-Housing, A Contemporary Approach to Housing Ourselves. And that book sold about 50,000 copies, 3,000 in the first 6 months, did very well, and it started a movement in this country. That's the build-up to then. Interestingly enough, I just got a call from a reporter, and she said, Chuck, why has co-housing slowed down in the U.S.? Why did it start off with such gangbuster, and now it's going much slower? It started off, we were building about 10 new ones a year. Now we're building about 5. And before I could answer her, she said, I know. Because at first, there was only a book available about co-housing with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And people could figure it out from that book. There were some rough edges in figuring it out, but they could figure it out. Now, she continued, people go to the internet first, and it's full of chaos and gobbledygook and false paths and just too much information that doesn't make sense. And there's so much information you can't find out about co-housing on the internet. So it's definitely a losing proposition to find it out about there. So I really recommend to people, if I was going to start a co-housing in LA, for example, the first thing I would do, just like I did in San Francisco, just like I did in Sacramento, is I would make sure as many bookstores and libraries had the book as possible, because then they seem to get started. And I'm doing that I'm still doing that.
So going back to the story of Cal Poly, so you're at Cal Poly, you start off in engineering, you switch to architecture. So I understand correctly that you went to Copenhagen or Denmark as a fourth-year student, like a study abroad program?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I started out as a planner, then as an engineer, and then an architect. So I had 3 majors there.
Right.
And I was double majoring in engineering and architecture, so I was busy.
Really?
But while I was there, Cal Poly being the biggest school in the U.S. and in the middle of nowhere, with very little architecture around it, they encourage you to go overseas. So I had 5 countries to consider: Denmark, Sweden, France, Spain, and Denmark, France, Spain, and Italy. And Italy, yeah. And I was predisposed to Italy, but I decided I was going to make a really significant research project out of which one I was going to go to. And not only was I double majoring my 3rd year, but I also spent the year trying to figure out which of these 5 schools I would suit me best. It's the most thorough research project I've ever done, and I've written 16 books. But anyway, and I only had one goal. The goal was which country is translating its 2-dimensional goals into the third dimension most successfully, whether it's schools, hospitals, prisons, housing, parks, you name it. Who is turning, like you could argue, their general plan into reality most likely? And it was Denmark by head and shoulders. So I went there. So it was nothing random about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's amazing too that you did that research before there was internet. Like there was probably a lot more work to do research on those places, right? Before Google existed.
I wouldn't have got what I needed on the internet, actually, to tell you the truth. But what I did was interview people and go to the library and read stuff. I think if you tried to figure that out on the internet, I think you'd get lost. And interviewing people, a lot of people, Danish people, American people, others who had gone to school there, etc. I interviewed people who were involved with housing, people who were involved with schools, etc. I just got their phone numbers and called them up at midnight my time and talked to them at 8 a.m. their time. And I asked them, tell me something about your curriculum. Tell me something about your spaces and the organization of your schools. And can you send me some literature? That was really interesting, is how many people put literature in the mail of plans and site plans and floor plans and elevations. Wow. And it convinced me that they didn't try to convince me. In fact, I stayed pretty neutral in my questions. And I interviewed people from Italy too, trying to figure out which of the 5 countries. And it was really head and shoulders the Danes, for sure. I think if you tried to figure that out now on the internet, you would still have a difficult time because there's so much hyperbole about environmental design. Oh, we want to be so sustainable, and we want to create a sense of place and all that stuff. And then you find out they didn't.
There's a lot of greenwashing on the sustainability end of things. It's actually funny. This interview is timed kind of well, because we just over the holidays we went to Copenhagen, Denmark, for the very first time. And it's a quick backstory. I also went to Cal Poly. And so when I was there, Copenhagen was also a 4th-year program, which I did not do. So this was my and our first time there. And it was very fascinating. So I'm curious, your first visit, and even now, were there other things about the Danes, Denmark, and that caught your attention, through the lens of design and architecture, other than the co-housing aspect of it, or even just culturally in the broader sense?
Yeah, the cultural was much bigger. The anthropological phenomena was much bigger than even the architecture. I mean, the architecture is important. We have a big poster in our office that says, "If it doesn't work socially, why bother?" And so we stretch architecture all the way across the anthropological realm. And very much every project we start, whether it's in this country or Canada, I've consulted on projects in Denmark and Australia, New Zealand, and India, and Pakistan, and others. And I always start with the same question: who are we as a culture, and who do we want to become? And then thirdly, how do we get there? Come up with a game plan on how to get there. I wrote a book about that process. It's this latest one called Cohousing Communities. So if you wanted to know a lot about that process, it's 900 photos and 450 pages about how to appropriately design a place that wants to reflect the aspirations of a culture.
I love that description of your work in architecture in the broadest sense. And Marin and I, we were actually just chatting about this. It's one of, this is perhaps a slight tangent, but it's one of the things about, I think, what we collectively do as a species, hopefully for the positive, that a lot of people who are not architects don't realize how much we think how we think about our work in that manner. And obviously some architects are practicing in that vein more directly and greatly like you, and others are, doing other things. But I find that most architects do have this common base perspective of, like you said, understanding the culture that we're in now and where we want to go. But it's just not something that the average person thinks that an architect would ever be concerned with, right? I feel like sometimes we're positioned as people who make nice looking buildings, and that's it,
Well, I realized early that I had to get out of regular architecture because I think of architecture as the second oldest profession, very related to the first oldest profession, because you kind of wait around, and I've worked for plenty of regular architects, you kind of wait around till some patron comes to the table and says, will you design me a fancy house or a boat dock or, a new office building or something.
Boat dock.
And you're beholden to them, basically.
Yeah.
And so I really wanted to influence culture change to my fullest extent possible and facilitate it. And it turns out that, I work with 50 groups and I've done 55 projects. 55 projects, and I usually start off with 50 adults. And we moved into this project with 55 adults and 37 kids. And that's my clientele typically, making a custom neighborhood, if you will. Mm-hmm. And, but I start with them. In this case, I had a public presentation, 150 people came. In my little town of 3,000 people, 150 people came. And the next, a couple weekends later, we did what's called a Getting It Built workshop with 25 households. And my job is to facilitate culture change. And then we do the site plan together. The point is that I believe everybody has a little bit of architect in them. And everybody comes to the table with values and experiences and all the rest. So my job is just to get that to resonate with each other and for each other. In other words, they learn so much about themselves in the course of doing a project. But what they mostly learn is how do they manifest their beholden goals around, I want to live in a more sustainable place. And consequently, here where I live, we built this project with all sustainably grown lumber, for example, FSC, and we had 13 school teachers who made $48,000 a year. So we had to make brand new houses for a lot of people who didn't have much money. Just before that, we had finished a project where 23 out of 26 were first-time homebuyers. So that's we're constantly in the position of beer budget, champagne taste, and the champagne usually runs around the sustainability stuff. We also have solar panels on every house, which nobody had before. Nobody had sustainably grown lumber. But they had it in them. All it took was a little conversation about, has anybody in this room been to a clear-cut forest lately and have seen what it does to the habitat and what it does to the watershed and what it does to the air quality? And then all of a sudden the conversation in short order, I offer them, hey, we could do this all sustainably grown lumber. These are people who didn't have a pot to piss in, and it cost us about $2,000, $2,500 a house. But they consensed on that. But we saved money on so many other things. And we also did 100% solar panel, solar power. My energy bill runs about minus $50 a year when it gets to the true up. So, and this was 20 years ago. We just had our 20th year anniversary. These values have been around for a long time. That's not the challenge. You read so many new things about how important this and how important that is. We all know it's important now, or not all of us, but a lot of us know that it's important now. Now we have to manifest it. Well, the only way to manifest it, in my opinion, is go to the people and say, okay, you guys want to put your money where your mouth is, or what do you want to do here? And they usually want to do what they say they want to do.
So I'm very curious to know, who reaches out to you first for these projects. But before we get into that, I think maybe for the listeners who are not familiar with what cohousing is, can you kind of explain it in a short sentence or two?
Or a long paragraph.
Or a long paragraph.
Yeah, what is cohousing? What makes it cohousing?
Well, just to begin with, I coined the word cohousing. It says in the Oxford English Dictionary, coined by Chuck Durrett. And And then I defined it in the U.S. I didn't have to define it in Denmark, but they define it themselves, and they define it even more, a lot more rigidly than we do, largely because we hedged our bets in terms of what we could tell Americans what they would do, et cetera, et cetera. So that comes back to who are we as a culture, and really what can we do? Co-housing has 6 components. One is that the future residents are wholly involved with the design and the development and the organization of the effort. And I really appreciate that, because that means, like where I live, the houses when we started construction in this town averaged 500,000. We had to build houses at 255,000. If we didn't have the future residents, it would have cost 500,000. But the future residents play such a big role in helping make it affordable. They champion the cause through the city. We get the bank financing because we have all pre-sold units. They do 100% of the marketing. There's so many things that they accomplish that, I worked for another developer who spent 8% of the sales prices for the houses on marketing alone. So, we just cut so many costs that way. Second thing is it's designed to get to know your neighbor. And by definition, co-housing basically is about knowing your neighbor, caring about your neighbor, and supporting your neighbor at some basic level, especially in senior co-housing. And so that has to do with, we have 3 acres for 34 houses, and we park all the cars to one side, and you have to walk. I have to walk 700 feet to get to my house, and everybody has to walk some distance. And the older people live closer to the common house, but we had a woman who just died at 3 weeks before her 100th birthday, and she moved to right across the lane from me, also 700 feet. And I asked her one day, Meg, why did you move? And she says, because my kids talked me into living by the parking lot, but I find that my life is better if I know my neighbors, and I know my neighbors because I walk home, blah, blah, blah. So, and that's definitely true. Thirdly, is there's extensive common facilities to supplement the private houses. Like we have 2 guest rooms there. We have dinner 4 or 5 times a week there. You don't have to come. But they're very popular, extremely popular. For one thing, people make these amazing dinners. It's really a glorified eating club. And they make these amazing dinners for $4 or $5. So, and it's almost a competition. How do you, accomplishing that? 4 is it's entirely self-managed. And 5, there's no management. And everybody's on the board. Every adult's on the board. So it has they're condos legally, but they have nothing to do with how typical condos are managed, because they're usually managed with 5 or 7 people on the board telling other people what to do. We not only have every adult on the board, but every decision is made by consensus. We meet 2 hours a month to accomplish that, and it works. And we designed this whole project by consensus, tell you the truth, because we made big moves. We didn't want 2 parking places per house. We wanted 1.5 parking places per house, but that was consensed. And because of the culture of sharing cars, borrowing cars, and driving less, we were able to do 1.5 cars. And the residents lobbying the city. This is all we want to do. And, it's really hard to tell your second grade teacher no. So that's one of the things I love about co-housing. 55 projects. I've only had one that didn't go through and get built. That was in Marin County, a very hard place to get things done. But we figured it out within a couple of weeks, so we didn't go far on that one. I had a neighbor once who said, Chuck, I've been living in this town for 20 years, and I usually buy 4 or 5 tanks of gas a month, 4 or 5 tanks of gas a month. And now I buy less than 1 tank of gas a month. So that's every move we make, like around where the parking is, hey, you going to the store? Hey, I'm going to the store. Can I take a ride with you, etc.? That all is facilitated by having remote parking that everybody walks to. And in fact, the funny thing is I go, oh yeah, sure, jump in. And they said, hey, can I just give you my list? And I go, fine. 5 is that there's no hierarchy whatsoever. I mean, if you try to, I'm the architect of this place, and I was the project manager, and I actually sold the group the site. But now, after we moved in, if I try to exert anything, I'm a non-voice, just like anybody would be if you try to exert any, greater than thou wisdom. And sixth is that there's no shared income other than the couple $100,000 that we have to spend a year to, maintenance and stuff. But otherwise, there's I keep my income, they keep their income. We had to do that as soon after we wrote the first book, because there were American communes, which, bless their heart, but they wanted to use that word, and we had to say no thanks, because they needed to use that word because communes had gotten such a bad rap, and people still go, "Oh my God, is that a commune?" No, it's not a commune. These are really middle class folks, or lower middle class, mostly teachers. The plurality of people who live in co-housing across the world are school teachers. Oh. Okay, is that enough definition, Marina? Or you want
That's
more?
awesome.
I think
That's
so.
Very clear.
Okay.
That's very clear.
Good.
So,
Go ahead.
so to live in a co-housing project, do you need to come as a group to, let's say, to start one, or do you have to have a bunch of friends and you want to live together? Who comes to you? How does it start? Does it start with the people? Do you have to find the people? I'm very.
And
intrigued.
is there a minimum number of residents in a co-housing, let's say neighborhood, or however you describe it, in order for there to be a critical mass?
No, those are great questions. They get started by a variety of means. I started this one. I just literally flyered the whole place, come to this presentation. But the first thing I did is I held a meeting for folks who had expressed interest in Nevada County for co-housing. We had gotten a letter from them at some point or something. And I held a meeting, and 8 people came. And I said, hey, I need all of your help. If we're going to make a co-housing in this town, I need all of your help to write news releases to the newspaper, write news releases for the radio, hang up flyers. There's 27 bulletin boards in this town, and we literally would put them up on the 27 bulletin boards and then have to start over again, because there was a serious anti-growth, very classist group of people here. Residents, they very much wanted to be Carmel, if you've ever been to Carmel by the sea. And They were anti-working class, low income. And they were all, multifamily equals crime, one resident told me. And
equals crime. It's a 1-to-1.
Yeah, I mean, the big myth we have in this culture is multifamily equals poor people, or more likely, you haven't made it until you have a single family house. Well, I think everybody who lives here feels like they made it and plus. So, but we have to transcend all those myths. Doesn't matter. That's part of the culture change. So the friends thing doesn't really work out very often. A group in Mountain View, there were 7 houses. They invited me to dinner one night, and they, which was about, 12 people altogether, no kids. And they said, oh my God, we've known each other forever. We like each other. We love each other. We go on vacations together. Our kids went to preschool together. We want to move into a co-housing. Well, predictably, I didn't say much, but predictably, as soon as they found a site, it went to 2 households, and that's typical. So, of course, they had to do the same thing that I just described. They had to put up flyers all over Mountain View. They had to write news releases to the newspaper and the radio. And it's easy to do that stuff because this is real news. The idea, especially around Nevada County, which is rural American, the idea that 34 households would get together and plan a new neighborhood together is pretty new. And so the newspapers ate it up, and the radio stations ate it up, and so that's how. Then we had 150 people come to a presentation, and then the next day we visited the site, and we had about 40 people, and then we had a workshop, and 25 households launched. We had what's called the Getting It Built workshop. So usually what I do, and I'm doing this next week in Austin, Texas, and I did it 2 weeks ago in Denver, Colorado. Usually what I do is I have a presentation on Thursday night, and one of the last slides I show, and I've been having, like 300, 350 people show up if it's a real town, if it's a big city. And I say, okay, for those who want to get serious, on the last slide, come to this library on Saturday morning, 9 to 5. We're going to talk about next steps. And usually 40 or 50 people come to that little get together, and we talk about the coming workshops, and and how to that we'll probably have to make an LLC, a limited liability corporation, but that all happens over 2 full days workshop called Getting It Built. It's important that all 25 households or however many in the group at that point hear the same thing. This is how the city process is going to go. This is how the design process is going to go. And a lot of people are anxious about the design process. They're not sure how households are going to make decisions together. So I show a lot of slides of a lot of groups making decisions together and making beautiful places. So the architectural eyewash, for lack of a better term, still has to play a big role. It has to photograph well anyway. And hopefully you can see some of that in the webpage, or more likely in the books. And then on Saturday, we just talk about how to do the next workshops, and we describe the whole design process. 4 weeks after the Getting It Built workshop, we're going to do a site design workshop. 4 weeks after that, we're going to do a common house workshop. 4 weeks after that, we're going to do private house workshop, then a design development workshop where we talk about all the materials, and then a prioritization workshop because we can't afford all the great ideas everybody had, so we have to have a full day of prioritizing things, hot tub, even more energy efficient stuff, whatever. It's always amazing how that is a very value-laden conversation, extremely rich, because we come up with, we have to prioritize normally 30 or 40 things, and the group gets to afford like 15. So you can imagine how value-laden it is. But all of that I was taught to. I met with 7 anthropologists in Denmark when I was writing the first book. And they really taught me how to work with large groups of people to figure out who they were, what they wanted to become, how they were going to get there. Do either of you guys know what the shortest poem in the English language is?
No.
It's me, comma, we. But most writing about it says that I could never reach my potential unless we reach our potential, which is great and true. And so the group figures out right away that 1 + 1 = 3. I have an idea, one of my neighbors has an idea, and the third idea that we come up with is better than either of ours. And they build amazing places over and over again.
I have a bajillion questions, as you might imagine. I have this feeling that we'll end up having more recordings with you. But anyway, as an architect, how do you champion that process? And I'm sure it's different with every group, the dynamics. But how do I say this? Like, how involved are you in managing the people or guiding them through it, or can you be pretty hands off?
Well, when it comes to the design, I'm very involved. I usually have 12 days with the group total as an architect. Sometimes I have other
for the design.
Days for the design alone, architecture alone. And, there's the 4 workshops that I described. The site takes 4 days, then 2 days, then 3 days, then 1 day, then 1 day, then 1 day. But I've been living in co-housing for like the last 35 years, not only Nevada City, but San Francisco Bay Area for 12 years, and then Denmark before that. So I have a lot to share. But as an architect, I try to garner all the ideas from the group, believe it or not. I mean, people come up to me all the time and say, Chuck, you've designed 55 of these and hundreds of other multifamily housing projects, by the way. And they say, Chuck, you've done this before. Why don't you just come up with a design and we'll critique it? And I just say, it's never as good. Yeah. It's never as good. Yeah. I mean, I have to be, I'm honestly humble about it. I will have a better project if I have you guys involved. And I want you involved because I want this place very much to reflect you. Because that's, we have 450 people hours in the common house a week. That's considered a very high functioning neighborhood / co-housing. And that becomes not only because they created it, but they own it emotionally. I want them to own it emotionally because that's what keeps them driving it in the right direction. So many people, so many architects, I forget the name of that project in Tucson that was going to change the world. And I've been to so many projects where the architects were going to change the world, and they didn't. They didn't do much at all, basically. I mean, they put some trappings on. There were some new trappings, but there was not much in the way of, and there was some sex appeal. But I feel like I have to make sex appeal too. Well, there's Arcosanti, but there's that one near Tucson. It's kind of default by now. Arcosanti, I mean, Paolo Soleri and I were on the phone 1 hour a week for a long time until he died because he wanted to see if he could get some co-housing in Arcosanti. But it never would work out because he wanted to be too heavy-handed. So he never trusted the group at all. And you do have to trust people to do this. You guide them. Yeah. Like, for example, when I was in Stillwater, Oklahoma, during our new project, which the group was mostly Republicans, which is fine. They need community too. And they need to change too, as far as I'm concerned. So I do have a political activism bent to me, especially around realizing that people act differently when they've learned to listen to their neighbor and talk to their neighbor versus not. I could go into on and on about Stillwater, including the fact that people there, they've been there about 15 years now, and they said nobody votes Republican anymore. And I think it's because they've learned to respect each other and listen to each other, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, when I was designing that project, I floated sustainably grown lumber because I let the group come up with their 28 things that we'll have to spend more money on, and then I usually have to add one or two that maybe they hadn't thought of. I think of everything. My job is to think of everything that they haven't thought of. So I said sustainably grown lumber, and there was just a universal forget that. We're not doing that. That was not that culture, but it just wasn't. I couldn't get them to even pay attention to it. But interestingly enough, the next thing I floated was air exchangers, ground source air heat exchangers for their heating and cooling, actually. And one of the women said, "Well, Chuck, that makes sense to us. That's what we do here in Oklahoma. We drill. These pipes were 200 feet deep, and we had to have dozens of pipes per house. So they liked the idea we were going to be drilling to get ground source heat pump. And their energy, they were $300 or $400 previously. Now they're $50.
Wow.
So you got to find a way to resonate with the culture.
And now a quick break to thank the sponsors who support the second studio. Are you tired of juggling multiple pieces of software and struggling with spreadsheets that aren't made for the realities of design and architecture in 2023? Built by and for designers and architects, Programma's all-in-one suite of tools has everything modern studios need for every stage of a project. Mood boards, the world's best specification tools, procurement tracking, project management, and more. All smartly integrated and easily shareable and always up to date, reducing time-consuming double handling and costly errors. Share work in various formats from PDFs to client-friendly, up-to-date online dashboards. Join the ranks of leading studios using Programma today. Click the Programma link in our show notes to start for free. Dear architects, design leaders, and founders redefining the industry, if you want to shape not only buildings, but the business behind them, this is your moment. Future London Academy's Executive MBA takes you inside the boardrooms of Pentagram, Uber, Zaha Hadid Architects, and Google, where you'll master finance, strategy, and operations from the people who already excel at them. Study along peers transforming the industry worldwide and do it all in just 9 intensive weeks over 1 year between London and California. The program is award-winning, transformative, and crafted for design and architecture leaders with 15 or more years of experience. If you're ready to grow your impact, apply now by tapping the Future London Academy link in our show notes.
This episode is brought to you by Chaos. They make award-winning design and visualization tools, and they're really pushing the boundaries with AI. Now, AI is shaking up the architecture and design world, and Chaos is taking a responsible approach. Their tools are built to help architects, designers, and visualization specialists to work faster and explore more ideas without replacing creativity. Basically, Chaos wants AI to make your imagination stronger, not take over. So you get to design with more freedom, create stunning visuals, and stay in control of your work. If you want to see what that looks like, tap the Chaos link in our show notes.
That brings me to that other question, which is, what draws people to co-housing? Mm-hmm. And I'm sure it's different for, again, different groups, but is it the cost savings that appeals to them? Is it the community? Is it the sustainability? Like, is there particular aspects that tend to be the leading, draw for folks?
Well, there's that. And then some, usually when I do a public presentation, somebody will ask me, Chuck, who moves into co-housing? And I always say you have to have two qualities. You have to know how to listen. You can't get to 1 + 1 = 3 unless you know how to listen. And you have to know how to read. And it's amazing how many Americans don't like reading anymore. So, have somebody read the book to you, or one of the books. There's a lot of books on it.
Right.
Most people get kind of embarrassed by that notion because they know it's true, and they force themselves to read something. So that they come to the table not disrespecting their neighbors who have read, so that they can contribute. And so as far as the listening goes, I would say that, I always say you have to know how to listen to live in co-housing, because one of the big parts of the Getting It Built workshop is how to become a lean, mean co-housing machine. How do you make decision after decision after decision by consensus? And usually in 15-minute blocks. So in other words, we're making a decision, then we're making another decision, then we're making another decision every day, all day. And if the group thinks I'm rushing them, we'll slow down, and we won't make a consensus in 15 minutes. We might take 20 minutes or 25 minutes, but we make sure that it's all fair. So the group process conversation is very thorough. That said, of course, I always say you have to know how to listen. A lot of people say, well, I'm going to try this. I'm going to see if I know how to listen. A lot of people don't know how to listen, especially we find that lawyers have the hardest time in co-housing. They really do. And yeah, but it's partially because they're used to giving, expensive advice, $500 an hour, advice. And when it comes to listening, they're not that great typically, especially when it has to do with, their lifestyle or things that might infect them. But end of the day, I feel like, Ayn Rand was probably right. We only do things for ourselves. Oh, let me say one more thing about the listening. I would say every project, there's like 10 people who come to the table who are not great listeners, but they're like many people I know who live here. They decide, I'm going to learn how to listen, or I'm going to drop out. So those two choices always exist. And it's usually about 50% of the people who admit themselves that I'm not really a good listener, that, they interrupt people, they talk over people, they don't really hear people, and they're just waiting to say what they have to say, et cetera, et cetera. And then the other 50% learn how to do it, 50% learn it, 50% draw. I just can't do it. I don't have the patience to sit there. Now, the funny thing about the patience part and the consensus part is I just did a co-housing in Northern California, Cotati, California, 32 units. Very complicated because we had 8,000 square foot of commercial on that site too. And this very complicated project right on Main Street, downtown, flush front facade. We were done start to finish in 3 years. The senior housing right next door to us, a brand new senior housing project, was 5 years, and the single family houses next to them and next to us was 7 years. We always get our projects built a lot faster than any other developer I ever come across. And it mostly is there's a bit of a moral turpitude that takes over with all the aficionados and the bureaucrats. And that I need to get my favorite librarian into the co-housing. I need to get this sweet young lady who's comes to the podium nursing her baby into the co-housing as soon as possible. So, and as far as I'm concerned, that's the way it should be. When people talk about housing as if it's some kind of an academic thing, because they don't really know real people who are either out of housing or mishoused or ill-housed or unhoused. And so, but when you're designing a new co-housing, you do know people who are in those situations. It becomes personal. Everybody starts to take it personal. We handle the bureaucrats and the city councilors and the planning commissioners as if it's personal, as if they matter, and then they handle us as if we matter. And it's a unique process that way. It's not adversarial. I basically always say, the planners, when you walk in the door, they should always say, "How can I help you?" As opposed to, "Oh, you can't do that. You can't do that." We often have major variances, like no setback, flush facade. Half the parking, literally half, often, over the height limit, for example. And when I put that on the table, I really encourage them to say, "How can I help you?" And I have one of the residents with me, and I say, "Hey, we really need your help, and if you could help us, we'd really appreciate it." However, that said, I go for very few variances anymore. I mostly do plan unit developments because in every zoning code across the land, there's usually a paragraph or two. Nowadays, it's like 5 pages that says, "Here's our 4 inches of zoning code. But if you have a better idea, if you think you can do better than this, make a proposal." And so our projects are always a PUD as a result, since the first dozen. But even in a PUD, the planners still act like you're asking for variances.
Yeah.
And I've come to the conclusion that these mom pa kettle are better planners than they are. So this is what we propose. They are.
Yeah. No, I what you're saying resonates for sure. I think what's really interesting about a lot of what you just said is, and from the beginning as well, that there seems to be sort of like a natural selection process in place in terms of who are the people who will live in this community. And it's almost like because they have to, because you listed a few different requirements, right? They have to be good listeners. They have to read. They have to show up. They have to do the work.
Yeah. Generally speaking, they get newer requirements later. You have to belong to a committee and stuff.
I was just going to say that I think it's interesting because it's like, because the future residents are find themselves obligated, or they want to be involved and committed, I feel like that is one of the key aspects that allows these projects to move forward, and why those other development projects take forever or they don't take place.
Yeah, that's right. A third of them never get approved.
Yeah, for sure. And like for us, we mostly do single family houses, and in a much smaller scale, it is parallel, because if we have clients who are just not committed to the project, but in the end understand that it's a large commitment and a lot of money, the project doesn't go well because they are not spending, frankly, enough time thinking about it if they're going to really care about what they're spending money on. And it's like you almost need that level of commitment from any client in order for the project to thrive.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, one thing I learned from the anthropologists in Denmark was the programs. I write a 90-page program for every project before we get started with the residents. So it's all words. And I find words easy to consent on. Before the pencil hits the paper, I don't draw anything until I have 90 pages of narrative. Who this group is, who they want to be, how we plan to implement it. And it's very little boilerplate. It's all very original work. And but it goes pretty fast because I read a lot about anthropology, and I've learned how to ascertain who a population is. And I worked in Africa for a year where I got to practice my amateur anthropology. But I want to say back to your point about the, basically I feel like Ayn Rand was correct, unfortunately. So what happens is residents they have to figure out one thing early. How does this make my life easier, more convenient, more practical, more economical, more safe, more fun, more interesting, more healthy? All, those 10 kinds of main things about life. And how does it affect my ability to grow old healthfully? How does it affect my ability to be a good parent? As I said, we moved in with 37 kids, and a lot of people started to get on that bandwagon because they saw that if a kid, my kid was an only child, and she could run out the door and be playing with somebody else in 5 minutes. So it would have been abusive to her. And she would have watched media. We never had a TV the whole time she was growing up. And she just ran outside when she wanted to be stimulated, basically. The kid across the lane from me is 4 years old. He just runs outside and oftentimes runs into 4 or 5 other preschoolers, and they just run around. So I know I'll be a better parent. That's a very common refrain. I'll be a better parent, and I'll learn so much from the other parents. And that's really true. They talk about parenting all the time, basically. And I'm really impressed with how that has affected their evolution as parents, basically. So Ayn Rand is the secret to who joins co-housing. People who figured out how this will actually serve them.
That makes sense.
I have so many thoughts with this conversation. It's a little overwhelming.
Yeah.
But what it comes down to is the whole community aspect, right, of living. And it just kind of made me think, what you were saying, your daughter growing up with that TV and all of that. I'm kind of thinking about, we have a kid too who's 1.5 years, and we talk about parenting a lot with our friends, and we talk through text messages and this and that. And it made me wonder, it feels like in 2026, in today's world, there is a lot of, let's say, online communities that exist where people have those, kind of support platform and help each other out. But it doesn't really translate to the world we live in the physical space. I feel like we're all, again, very isolated. And it's kind of strange because it feels like there is a huge need and thirst for people to find that community aspect in their relationship online. But somehow
and it doesn't work as well either. It doesn't work as well.
It doesn't work as well.
Yeah.
No, I find my online and cell phone community very tenuous. You learn to speak in shorter and shorter sentences. But I also find, one of the main goals for this project, which really blew me away, this was consensed. That's the first aspect of designing a project. What are your goals? And for yourself and for the community. And a spontaneous social life is often a very high goal. And it's usually first or second compared to a balance between privacy and community. That's why I feel like co-housing works so well for Americans, because we like choice. But most residentials, you don't have a choice for community. You have a choice of privacy or privacy, which is basically no choice. So if I not seldom walk out to my car and get into a conversation with a neighbor that is really deep and really meaningful. And sometimes it's carrying on a conversation that we've been having for 20 years about something. Sometimes it's complicated, issues about community or democracy or spirituality. just things that we resonate with, but we have infinite opportunity to talk about it, especially at common dinners. I mean, I can tell you we've had conversations that have been going on for 20 years. And I like how deep they're getting. They're the opposite of a tenuous text message, basically. They get so deep. And I really feel like it's a blessing, frankly, to be able to live in a place where you know people, you care about them, and you support them. We have all this snow, and I had to give somebody a ride like 4 or 5 miles the other day, and that was fine. I mean, because I have a good 4-wheel drive vehicle, and you just do things for people because you run into them on the path, and you say, "Hey, what are you doing? Hey, I have to go away. I have to go to this other place, and can you give me a ride?" And I go, "Oh, yeah, sure, let's do it." I mean, luckily I'm self-employed and I can do things like that, but it makes my life so convenient at so many other levels. Look at somebody last night and the night before that and the night before that, somebody else did all the shopping for dinner, somebody did all the cooking for dinner, somebody did all the cleanup for dinner, and I just showed up, had dinner, and beat it. Went to choir practice, lived my life.
So what happens when someone leaves the co-housing community? Like, how do you replace that? How do you fill the spot? Is there like an interview process? Is there like a wait list for people to get in per se? Like, what's the kind of like life evolution of
because
of
it's still wait. So let me clarify. Also, it's one large private development, right? Like the neighborhood
That's
is
correct.
itself.
That's right.
Okay.
It's 34 houses on 3 acres. So here's here's I don't know if you can see that or not, but there's like 10 kids playing baseball on the front lawn there, and that's what kids can do. And if I need to find my kid, I go out there and she'll usually be there. This is a co-housing that we just finished in Vancouver. And, the motivation for the woman who started that project, who was 29 years old. And millennials are always saying to me, "Chuck, we can't afford houses." And I feel like that's bull. I feel like the only way and I write this all the time, the only way you're going to be able to afford housing is if you get organized. And if you get organized, you'll get things done so much easier, so much better than if you go it alone. Again, we have so much pull yourself up by the bootstraps in this culture that we make it harder, a lot harder than we have to be. This project in Vancouver, a 29-year-old woman came to me and her brother and said, "Chuck, I'm a physical therapist, and 100% of my patients are brain damaged. They're all infants and toddlers. And they're all brain damaged by their own parents. So it's very complicated, very stressful job. When I get home, I need a supportive community there. So will you help me make a co-housing community?" When we started that project, the average house in Vancouver was $778,000. We had to make houses for $200,000-300,000. And they could only accomplish, it's 2/3 millennials. They could only accomplish that by cooperating and thinking and being super organized, being really careful. For one thing, what they did is they bought 2 single-family houses and had it rezoned. Rezoning is challenging. I do it a lot, but co-housers do it a lot. But it's very, very complex. This was a huge single-family house neighborhood, the very old traditional single-family house neighborhood, less than an acre, and we had to make 0.61 acres, and we had to make 31 houses on it. And they did, wow. And it's affordable, and it's very alive, and it's beautiful, and they have 4 shared cars, and they have half the parking places that the city wanted them to do. But they only did that by lobbying politicians, etc., because they knew how to organize. And I helped them organize a lot because I've organized my way through this several times, many times. And but most people don't even know how to begin to get organized. I mean, instead of complaining, hold a meeting on Saturday at 4:00, 10 other people who can't afford squat, and start to talk about it with somebody who knows what they're doing. people often ask, why did co-housing get started in Denmark? And the Danes would say because they start their meetings on time, or something flippant, like that, which Americans do have a hard time with. It's very disrespectful to come late, and it takes you a little time to figure that out. But once you figure it out, you don't come late anymore because, nobody wants to repeat themselves. We want to get this neighborhood built. But they had a philosopher in 1850 who named Nikolai Grundtvig, who convinced the farmers who were having a very hard time that if you're going to buy grain at the same price that the farmer does with 100 cows and you only have 2 cows, then you better join with other people, 20, 30 other farmers, and have 100 cows total and buy the grain at the same rate. So they figured out early. This philosopher, he's the second most famous philosopher in Denmark, and a lot of people subscribe to him. Second only to Søren Kierkegaard, who came up with the whole existentialist point. But anyway, the culture, when they have a problem, cooperation is how to solve the problem. And they had a problem in the 1970s and 80s. The problem was, the men had to cook dinner as often as the women, and we had to figure out how to get out of it. The women's lib thing had a big impression on co-housing because it wanted to equalize everything and make it fair. But to do that smart, especially if the women were going to be working out of the house, we had to get cooperative. We had to think it through, basically. So they thought it through. If you're shopping, cooking, and cleaning, then I don't have to. And if you do it once a month, which what we do here is I have to cook once a month for the whole community. Everybody does. And that level of cooperation makes life more convenient, more practical, more interesting, and more fun. And it's the common dinners. It's, breaking bread is the most timeless form of creating and sustaining community, no doubt about it. But it's really the conversations that we have over dinner that are by far the most meaningful, by far, and rich and interesting and meaningful to everybody's lives, I think. And by the way, I'm going for a hike this Saturday. Do you want to go? I'm taking the kids to the zoo on Sunday. Do you want me to take your kids? I mean, it just goes on and on and on. It's infinite.
So, but what does happen if someone decides to move? Do you have to be selective about who takes their spot?
Well, we've had 10 people die here over the 20 years because 21 people moved in quite old in the 80s or late 70s or 80s. So their kids sell the house. But we have a committee that tries to set them up for success and set the community up for success. The first thing they do is they read that 90-page program that we came up with 20 years ago, because it kind of reads like, this is what we want to accomplish and this is why. And that's really to set the group up for success. I mean, in reality, the group doesn't pick anybody. The individuals pick us, period, really, because we can't prejudice against anybody. Yeah. And but we try to tell them what we did, why. And it's so interesting, if they have a new and better idea, they can propose it. But it usually only happens about once per community, because once you really get into it and you talk to the people who were there making the decisions, for example, and why and what the backstory was and all the rest, then you realize, oh, maybe we don't need to do that. New residents have made a lot of great suggestions, and interestingly enough, they tend to be really good they tend to be good communitarians, frankly, because they see who we are and, the culture we've created. So they want to come in and participate, generally speaking. Sometimes when I organize a work day or somebody else organizes a work day, it's easier to make sure that the new people, or to ask the new people to show up and than the old people who've already felt like they've done a lot. That said, the tragedy of the commons still exists. In other words, maybe somebody else will do it. So we have to play games with ourselves to help people realize, tell them how much money their house cost before they moved here, and the maintenance, how much it cost before they moved here. And now it costs a fifth of that, so please participate, et cetera, et cetera. So education is the answer, Marina. Education is the answer. And it's not, there's no doctrine. There's no doctrine except you do have to cook dinner once a month. You do have to belong to one or two committees and a few other things, which I've never read the rules. So, because if you live in a real culture, it's like the Iroquois, you know the rules. You find out.
Right.
The norms and the mores.
I was wondering about the cost of construction. I think, we talked about the timeline, the design process, but the cost of construction, because it seems like, with that model, you're really able to, get the best for the best price, right?
But go ahead.
But I'm very intrigued, like, how do you make that happen, right? But how do you make sure that this happen in every different places, you develop those co-housing communities? Because I'm assuming that Vancouver is a very different construction cost than it is here. So do you rely on the group to kind of like work that out? Do you have a contractor you work with for every single project? Like is it just a matter of scale? Is that the only thing that's driving the cost down?
No, it's complicated. I mean, believe it or not, this project was $95 a square foot. When I started this project, two contractors, one told me it was going to be $150 minimum, and the other one told me it was going to be $200 minimum. But anyway, I'll come back to that point. I'm actually doing a seminar starting in March 18th, 1.5 hours for eight weeks, 8 times 8. And it's all about how to do affordable multifamily and affordable co-housing, actually, specifically. So I'll give you the short answers because it's a long conversation. I just did a class. 37 people showed up, and it was a great group of people. I really feel good about what they learned. But and this book here, I cover a lot about cost too. So because it's important, especially if I'm going to have 13 school teachers, or Britta, this woman who we designed her and two others shared houses so that they could move into that co-housing. But they're unique shared houses. People have their own door to the outside. People have their own bathroom, etc. But most importantly, they have that particular co-housing has a 6,100 square foot common house that supplements the private houses, which average less than 1,000 square feet. They're like 900 square feet. Let's say they're 1,000. So if I have 1,000 square foot house, and most of them move from bigger houses because most houses in the old days up there were just not very efficient energy wise or planning wise. Anyway, and where I live here, people move from about 2,000 square foot houses, and now they live in, on average, 1,250 square foot houses. But we have a 4,200 square foot common house. So our 4,200 plus 1,200 is 5,400 square foot house. We all have a 5,400 square foot house because the common house is really an extension of my house. I have dinner there on occasion. I do my laundry there all the time. I watched the Olympics there last night with my neighbors on an 8x8 screen. Even we don't have a TV in the common house, but people put up the big screen on special topics, the elections, the Super Bowl, stuff like that. So all those things you don't have to buy and don't have to build around. I mean, the TV alone takes I don't know how many square feet, and the number one way they keep the prices down is building a house now that's half as big as it would otherwise have to be if they were doing it on their own.
Yeah.
The way the music room is up there, the guest rooms are up there. There's the kids' room is up there. We build routinely 10 by 11 square foot, 10 foot by 11 foot bedrooms, which sometimes people think are small, but they have a 20 by 20 square foot kids' room in the common house, and that's where the other kids are too. So on a snowy day like this, that's where the action will be. And we have a teenage room. We have a teenage room that's very popular. When we moved in, we had 12 teens. And one night I was up there on a Saturday night, and there were 21 teens in the common house. and 10 of them lived here, and 11 of them didn't. And then the next morning I read that the safest thing you can, in the front page of the New York Times, the safest thing you can do with your teenagers is keep them at home. Well, that has to be where the action is, frankly. So the action's in our common house. And we have a music room up there so that I don't have to listen to Jessie learning how to play the violin. She could play at home once she learns how to play the violin. But now she not only practices up in the common house, but we have 2 or 3 teachers here, and one in particular who's a really great teacher on the violin. So they teach them. They teach the kids. There's a lot of teaching that goes on here.
I got a question about proximity to folks' work, because as you might not be surprised by, I've had a handful of conversations with colleagues, friends, family members, whatever, casually and somewhat, humorously, but also seriously about effectively a co-housing project. And the initial motivation of the conversation in a lot of these groups is to do with costs. It's like in LA or wherever, it's $2 million to buy a house, and a lot of people don't have that kind of money. But one of the challenges that comes up during our very informal alcohol-derived and driven conversation is proximity to people's jobs. And it seems like a lot of the large areas that have an acre or more of land that's cheap are going to be in more remote places. How is that addressed, or is it addressed naturally by just people, being drawn to where they are going to be?
Well, it has to be addressed. I mean, one of the things I spend a lot of time doing is flying around, unfortunately, and helping. That's one of the things I'll be doing in Austin this coming week, is helping them find a site. Now, and there's a lot of tricks to it. And one of the tricks that we utilize is I never buy anything or help a group buy anything anymore that's zoned correctly. Because if it's zoned correctly, you're competing with somebody else who's going to make multifamily housing. So we find an old factory, or we find totally rundown houses somewhere, and on the Berkeley, California, we had a rental project. It was the first rental project in 30 years that turned into ownership, and the 3 single moms who started that project said, "Chuck, here's the deal. I want my house payment to cost the same as my rent." So we had to make 4 houses at $130,000, and the time in the average house in Berkeley was $500,000 too. But the cool thing is again, it comes down to organizing, and getting creative. When you're sitting there with 20, 25 people in the room, or 50, there's a lot of creativity that starts to flow. And these are people who need housing, want housing, economic housing. This whole thing about Berkeley, that raises a lot of other questions. So, the group had to, they were so run down that nobody really lived in that project. But we rehabbed all these houses and turned it into a very affordable co-housing. The very first co-housing we did in the U.S., brand new construction, 23 out of 26 were first-time homebuyers. It wasn't a particularly cheap piece of land, but we managed. We had the cheapest houses that was 1991. The cheapest houses were $105,000, and but what we do is we get the group to organize a mortgage broker who really counsels everybody on how to buy a house. That's the bigger problem, is the discipline around. If you have a new car, you have to sell it and drive a used car until you get this project built. If you go to the movie, I hear these refrains from the mortgage brokers over and over again, and it's always kind of interesting to see people's reaction. If you go to the movie, 5 times a month or whatever, you have to go once every other month. If you don't have a good relationship with your aunt in Florida, send her 2 birthday cards this year, because you have to repair that, because you're going to need some help with your down payment. But getting your butt in ownership housing is always a better bet than renting housing, basically. I mean, there's virtually no rental co-housing in the U.S. anyway, but learning how to buy a house is a bigger issue than can you afford it. Most people can finally afford what they learn how to buy, but they don't even have a clue about how to. I hear these mortgage brokers say instead you have to cut off all lattes until you're moved in. You have to get no tattoos until you're all moved in, and tell these folks what should be darn obvious, but it's not. They get serious counseling at that level. Affordability is a big question, though. Come on March 18th, and you'll see the whole picture on affordability.
Yeah, actually, do please send the information, because I think this will go up before then, so we can at the very least, put a link in the notes and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of listeners would be interested to.
It's a very big
join.
topic. Even at 8 weeks, I can barely get it covered.
I'm sure.
So, I'm completely sold by the idea of co-housing, and I'm sure a lot more people, are or would be. I guess the thing is, how many of you exist out there to help create more of these projects, right?
Right.
I'm glad you asked that.
And how do people find the information? Yeah.
Well, one thing is we have a project on the boards right now, but we don't do very many working drawings anymore. So I'm really recruiting local architects to do the working drawings. And so I'll do the schematic designs with the group and usually get it through the city. But then I hand it over to a local architect. I find that challenging too, especially because, my ability to do affordable housing has a lot to do with how I started. I started doing designing really inexpensive production housing. So there's a lot of tricks to that. Although if you look at my house, it's kind of a mess, but it wouldn't normally be considered production housing, but it is production housing. And because, I knew how to translate quality construction to production housing. Marina, if I was in Los Angeles, what I would do, and it is sad that there's no co-housing in Los Angeles. There's a couple co-ops, but they're different. And if I lived in Los Angeles, first of all, I'd have to live in co-housing, so I know exactly what I would do. I would get the books in all the bookstores. That starts priming the culture. Sacramento co-housing would have never been built, except my mother made sure that every bookstore had a copy of the book. And then when she finished the first 20 bookstores, she started over again. Do you still have the book? Oh, it's sold here. Here, please order another one. And because what you tell the bookstores is, we are organizing a co-housing project in this town, and we want to tell people where they can get the book. So we, just put it in your literature for a new project. This is where you pick up a copy of the book, so that they can, when they come to the first meeting, they know something about what you're talking about. You're not going to talk them into it with a book or anything, but you just sort of till the soil a little bit, and that's fine. I never try to talk anybody into co-housing. They're either into it or they're not. And I'm sure in Los Angeles you'd find enough people that are into it. And then I would do a public presentation, which would be me and perhaps Katie McCammett could do it. And the reason I'm happy, used to be 100 people or so would show up. Now there's like 300 people that show up. And the reason I like that is because on Saturday morning, you find out all the talent that you have in the room. And, the people, and you don't need designers necessarily, but you need people who are good at organizing, somebody that will be on the finance committee, somebody will be on the legal committee, making sure everybody's comfortable with where we're headed and what we're spending and all the rest. And you get 4 or 5 people who are good at the marketing committee so that they find more people. And you get 4 or 5 people who are good at group process so that they do the facilitation at the meetings, et cetera, et cetera. So, did that answer your question, Marina, or was that even your question?
Yeah, no, I think, I would love to see more co-housing projects happen. And I'm just wondering, how could we make it happen?
Well, I think you described it, but Marina's question was, you're clearly the expert on it. Is there is there a mentee or successor, or is there a group of Chucks out there that are also championing
I've been in practice
the mission?
for almost 40 years, and I've had 60 plus interns plus 60 plus employees, and when we were doing 4 or 5 co-housing a year in Berkeley, in our office in Berkeley, we had 22 staff. I'd say that probably a dozen of that staff has gone on and is creating co-housing, basically. Of course, I lament that they're not doing it as well, but at least they're getting started, and maybe they'll get better. I mean, I'm trying to foster firms that would do the working drawings and come to the workshops and be studious at that level. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And then I could turn them on to different classes on the affordability stuff, or mentor them on the affordability stuff. I mean, I did the schematics on a second project in Vancouver, and then a local architect took it over. Well, they came into budget $4 million over budget. Well, because that's familiar ground for me, and they stopped them for like a year, but finally they got me up there. And they sent me all the drawings before that, and I spent about a month getting ready for that meeting. Then I went up there, and we took $3.9 million out of the project, and now they're under construction. So sometimes you have to do drastic things like that.
I mean, it sounds like you could even do workshop just to train other architects to maybe build things in a more affordable manner. The bigger challenge is the anthropological side of it. People who really want to learn, architects who really want to learn how to listen and implement, basically. So that's the bigger challenge. And, I dream about somebody who was a double major in anthropology and architecture. But, if you read any of my various books, I talk a lot about the anthropological side. So.
Yes. I know you have a hard stop, so I have just 2 final questions. The first is, so is there a general minimum number of people or units that make a
that's a really great question, David.
Work?
Thank you.
Or maximum.
Yeah, thank you. Because I didn't talk about, there's so many things we could talk about. I don't know what you do to get the books out there, because this is a soundbite by comparison. The maximum is the more important thing, really. The Danes would say, and I will argue that I've never run into any population anywhere, and I do lectures all over Europe often, and I've never run into anybody who's done the social math better than the Danes. The Danes would say, don't build a co-housing community with more than 50 adults. First of all, you don't want to try to get consensus with over 50 adults. But at the same time, try to get as close to 50 adults as you can, because that way every individual living there have 4 or 5 really great friends over the years. In other words, it all comes down to probability. They have like 8 reasons to cap it at 50. The second one is that if you don't cap it at 50, the responsibilities get delegated a little bit too much, and you start to feel like you have a mini city government, like, he's in charge of that and he's in charge of that. Mm-hmm. And of course, we have a lot of allocated responsibility here, but the brainstorming happens at the common meetings, and the decisions happen a lot at the common meetings. And nobody cuts down a tree and then surprises everybody. How did that tree get cut down? I love that tree. I wanted to have a say about that. And so that's why the minimum of 50. I can't remember the other 6 reasons right off the top of my head. The minimum, I would argue, I've been to about 385 co-housing. And any time there were less than 15 households, they would always say, I wish it was a little larger. I mean, anecdotally, and not always, of course, but a preponderance of data came in from that direction. And again, it has to do with, relationships. I love everybody that lives here, but there's 4 or 5 people that I really resonate with. I really love to spend extra time with them. I'm spend time at their house, they spend the time at my house, et cetera, et cetera. And that goes all around. At 50 people, you're going to get that kind of probability working for you.
Gotcha. Wonderful. The last question we always ask, and I know we're actually at the hour, is what is your favorite, this is kind of a weird thing since we talked about co-housing, but what is your favorite building? Just like your favorite building as an architect.
Oh, no, I have no problem answering that because I'm as architect as anybody. I honestly am. I mean, I really love the technical side. I really love the design side. My favorite building in the world is the Sydney Opera House. I mean, I grew up in the late modern era anyway, and yet I feel like there was a lot of late modern disasters. Philip Johnson and others that didn't really hit the mark or reach, potential expectations. I was doing a project in Australia, so I went to the Sydney Opera House, and the tour guide gave me a private tour that lasted most of the day, and it was just fantastic. I've always loved that building. Second probably would be the Kimball Art Museum. I'm a big fan of West Coast Modern. What's the name of that group? The Hull and somebody. They're out of Seattle. I mean, you only asked for one, but I could give you a long list of buildings I love and buildings I love to hate. You should have people.
Yeah. This should be our next question.
Yeah, right. That's a great one. That's a good one. We should start doing. We might start doing that actually. Give me the one you're hating, the one you love. That's wonderful. Charles, this time flew by. The conversation with you will continue for sure. I think on here and then off of the recording as well. We really appreciate it. I think what you're doing is phenomenal and have been doing is phenomenal. And I'm sure there's more to come. So thank you.
You're welcome, you guys. Thank you for doing this, and good luck to you guys for sure. And consider starting at co-housing in Los Angeles. There's a lot of room for. I mean, people say, "Oh, there's no room in San Francisco." There's always room. They're building tons of new ones in Copenhagen. You guys were just in Copenhagen. Did you see any extra room sitting around while you were there? There's no room in Copenhagen.
You got to make the room.
You got to make the room. You'll find it.
Yeah. They're going to be rehabbing tons of buildings. There was I got a call. I have to tell you this. I got a call at midnight about 2 months ago from a Dane. And I thought, I knew who was calling me. He came up. And I thought, oh my God, his mother died. That's the only reason he would call this time of night. And he answers the phone. He says, Chuck, I have really good news. I go, what? And I said, your mom's okay, right? And he says, yeah. Anyway, I have really good news. They spent 3 years interviewing 80,000 seniors in Copenhagen and asking them, of these 5 housing types, which one do you want to grow old in? One was single-family house, condominium, apartment, assisted care, or co-housing. Co-housing was the majority, not even the plurality. It was the majority of responses were positive on co-housing. So they're completely rezoning everything and reimagining how to make the buildings, work, et cetera, et cetera. And there's tons of, like old docks and old on-ramps or whatever. There's always places to fit a new project in. So we converted an old factory in San Francisco several times, and they work fine as co-housing. But you have to keep in mind, the hard part is not the technical side. The hard part is keeping in mind, if it doesn't work socially, why bother? Don't just make more real estate. Make something that's got goods in it.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to this week's episode. If you want to support the show, that would be awesome. And the best way to do that is to leave a review of our podcast in the Apple Podcast app or Spotify. You can also like and subscribe and comment on YouTube, where we have all the interviews and more informative discussions. Our website is secondstudiopod.com, and that's also our Instagram handle, where you can follow on there and see clips, reels of our guests talking, quotes, work images, announcements, that kind of fun stuff. And if you have any guest suggestions or topics you want us to cover or questions to be answered, then you can text our hotline, which is 213-222-6950, or you call and leave a voicemail. And I think that's it. Is there anything else?
No, that's it.
Okay.
Thank you, guys. Stay tuned.
Okay, bye.